You guys are ready.
Here we are doing a Snowboarder Magazine Lens Crafters with the two auteurs behind Nike's recent snowboarding release, NeverNot Part 1 and NeverNot Part 2. Joe Carlino, you may know from several of the Transworld releases and going all the way back to the Sunday in the Park, as well as doing some of the full parts for Jess Camara. And Joe also worked on Jed Anderson's full parts. So Joe, you've done a lot of projects. You've got quite a pedigree within snowboarding. At what point did the idea of a Nike snowboarding video come together, and how were you approached about the project?
I moved to Portland 2 years ago, and Brian Craighill, who I'd done work with in the past, he was the brand manager for Nike Snowboarding, and he actually just hit me up out of the blue and was like, "Hey man, we're thinking about doing something next year, are you interested?" And I was like, for sure. I was like, yeah, just keep me in the loop. And then that last year was when we did those 3 web edits, which it was like myself, Brad Kramer did one, and Hosnick did one. And that was originally kind of the start of figuring out how to do a Nike movie. And then those ended up being the webisodes, which ramped up into this year where we did the full movie with the full team.
And is working for Nike different than working for some of the more endemic snowboarding projects that you've worked for that are a bit more personal and a bit more intimate?
Yeah, like the base of making the movie is the same. And there's, like all the pluses where obviously we had the best budget I've ever had to work with, so we were able to do the best color correction, the best sound design, get the best music, all legally, licensed the craziest music that I've ever thought we could use. In a sense, there was like some difficulties working with a bigger group, but there was also so many things that made it easier. There was people, to help project managers, people to help book flights. Like we went to Russia and they had it all set up for us. So things like that I think outweighed, like the corporate environment.
And you got a lot of free sneakers.
Yeah, lots of shoes, lots of sneakers.
That's good. How many people were involved in like setting the direction of the project? Did you start with basically just going with a fundamental part video like we've seen often?
When we started to get it off the ground, I'd say there was 5 people in the room every meeting, to try and get it going. And then it was the whole idea was how can we use this budget and get more than just a part movie? It's like I've always done the webisodes, and I was like, yeah, we could do webisodes till the cows come home, 15, 20 webisodes, however many you want. We could do a movie. And then that's when the whole part 2 idea came up, where it's like, well, how can we do something that's that brings a little more depth into snowboarding, gives the viewer something a little more to watch than the parts and the music. And it's also to hit a different market too, you're at the premieres and you see, a different type of person loves the part 2 documentary. And then there's this kid who's like, oh, I was blown away by the part 1 and the tricks and the music. So that was kind of the whole thing, was just to use the budget the best we could to hit everybody, and somebody could still enjoy a documentary and somebody could still enjoy the action movie without pigeonholing ourselves for a season, So.
And that brings us to Per-Hampus Stalhandske. Per, you've gone all the way back working with Action Horse and doing several projects in between, also working on your site Spatsiba and stuff. What drew you to working on, as the movies are broken up into part 1, part 2, one more action-based and one more with more of a narrative and dialogue, like Joe said, what drew you to the part 2, the more, gestured piece that sort of peeled the layers back?
Well, I don't know. Just before Joe called me, I'd been working on a regular feature indie documentary that had nothing to do at all with snowboarding, so I kind of got a taste for that whole side of filmmaking, and I always thought it would be really cool to try and make something similar in snowboarding, but pretty tricky because, I don't know, it's pretty hard to get people to talk comfortably on camera and stuff like that. But Joe hit me up and asked if I wanted to work on it with him, and I obviously said yes straight away because it sounded like a big challenge and like a crazy opportunity to be able to work on a big project like that.
Well, I mean, as cliche as it sounds, I mean, it's really true. I mean, there's a reason why a lot of riders let their riding speak for them, is because they're they're focused on that. They're not the most well-spoken individuals. How did you guys go about culling sort of the dialogue out of these icons who we don't really hear speak too often in a live action
Well,
movie?
I think it's super important just to kind of get them comfortable, and like you can't just do an interview for 10, 15 minutes. You kind of have to sit them down there for 2 hours or whatever it takes. And Joel Muzzy, who was the main interviewer, he's really good at pulling out the gold from these guys and making them comfortable. And we just kind of, it was first of all, like when we went into interviews, it was kind of like just a half an hour just conversation first, and then we kind of started looking for the questions that we were thinking about asking, and when they were comfortable, then just like pure gold started to come out of them.
Did you have like a lot of lights on the riders like we have now that are uncomfortably hot?
No, I think that helped a lot actually, because it was all pretty much natural light and just one camera and like a little mic.
Who do you think had the most poignant things to say, and like who's the most quotable?
I don't know, like there's so many. Like Nicholas, obviously, he's like a guru. He's crazy, but also like I was impressed by Jed. He had so much cool stuff to say, and Benny, and like and even like Louis Vito and like Scott Lego. I thought all of those guys had really interesting things to say. We have so much footage of them talking about crazy shit that we couldn't fit in the movie. So I don't know, maybe we should make part 3, 2.5.
How did you know that like this was going to be, you know, a huge project? At what point did you realize that this was just going to be kind of steamroll and turn into one of the big events of the fall movie season?
I think it's funny you say that, because me and Mark Dangler, we were editing since June on it, and I really think it was like, I feel like mid-August, we were like, oh, it's actually coming together. Like we edited for like month and a half, 2 months, and we were just like, I don't know, just nothing was like clicking. And then all of a sudden, like the last 2 weeks, it just seriously like evolved. It was crazy. Cause like,
is that when all the music got cleared? Because it's amazing music.
So the music, man, we were in the craziest battle of music for like 3 months. And
like a rap battle?
yeah, we were in rap battles. No, it was tough. Like the music industry these days, like all the rates are going up, and then right when everybody threw out the Nike project, it's just like Nike, you know, like we've cleared songs from the same exact label the year before, you know, when I wasn't working for Nike, for let's say a fifth of the price, you know, and then right when it's Nike, it's just like boom through the roof. So it's the money thing, and then it's also even people, you know, just clearing for this type of project. You know, some people weren't interested, and we were trying to hit up bands, and we were trying to get in touch with everybody. So that was a big problem. And then, but yeah, it was really, back to the root of the question, was like, it was really the last 2 weeks of the movie. I feel like it just kind of came together, and when the parts started butting up with each other, that's when we were like, man, this is actually coming together. Like, this is actually a movie. You know, and we sent around a lot of edits throughout the whole process, and it wasn't really till like mid-August, you know, a month ago, that it was like, I felt like it was fitting, and the stuff that Per was doing was the same way. He was sending around edits like right after trips of part 2, like mini documentary edits, and then we were just like, I was more hyped on that stuff, because I was like, wow, it's like a movie, like I can see it. Where the parts, until the end of the season, you don't have a part, you know, until end of April when we left Alaska. I was always like, man, I don't know, like, do we have enough footage, you know? And it really just comes together at the last second.
How did you adjust to going from, you know, the side of filming where you had where you kind of had a vision for a movie, and then you picked the writers to fit that vision, to kind of the flip side where you had the writers and you had to create a vision to fit to the writers? Because obviously you have, when it comes to the talent on screen, you have a lot more freedom outside of the company fold.
To be honest, the guys that were on the Nike team would be like a dream independent movie, if you think about it. You know, you have 3 of the best powder riders in the world. You have three guys that can do everything, rails and powder, and then you have 3 amazing urban guys. And that was kind of always my formula with the Transworld videos, is I always wanted to be equal all the way across the board. You know, and I'd worked with a lot of those guys in the past, so for me it was like, it was a home run. I was like, sign me up, you know. Working with Nico and Gigi was like a dream, you know. I never thought that when I was in high school, I never thought that I would be like filming those guys. I used to watch them in videos, you know, and so it was pretty crazy.
And then the first couple shots of part 2 were the first shots you shot of the project, right?
Yeah, I was in Locks. I stayed with Nico at his house for a month, which was the most insane time ever because he's so mellow and he's so calculated. And you know, we would go up and we'd snowboard the mountain, you know, when it was dumping and we couldn't film, or we would go up and get a shot or two and be like, let's just take a couple of runs, and we'd toss the bags inside, and you could just ski on and off from his house from Locks, like just take the lift up, go right down to his house, walk back to the resort, and it was like unbelievable setup there. So he had a room for us and we were all dialed, and Muzzy came out and it was really sick.
But I mean, that's a pretty incredible way to start off the film season.
It was crazy. Just like snowboarding POW in Locks with Nico, and then just like the very first shot, actually, I think the actual very first shot was he does a stale fish and then he lands and then ollies and then does a slash. And we just randomly came upon it in the trees. And it all happened within 5 minutes. He's like, oh, look at this, I'll go do it. And I went down, set up, 5 minutes, I had this shot, and I was just like, oh my God, this is what the whole winter is going to be like.
Yeah.
And so that's, that was like pretty much just like you start ramping up the season, you know? It was crazy.
Well, obviously the whole winter wasn't like that. I mean, what were some of the low points during the production of NeverNot?
To be honest, I had a lot of really good trips. I can think of a really funny trip of Austin and Sam Hiltner. They panicked from Oregon to go to Utah to start sledding early season. So they drove all the way out there 16 hours, and they went to the sled spot, and then it was just all rocks. And then they drove back to Oregon the next day. So that was a pretty funny one. Everybody was pretty healthy. I mean, I can't think of any crazy stories, can you? I mean, Manuel's avalanche was really crazy in Alaska.
Yeah,
that was really scary. But for the most part, everybody was really healthy. You know, Haldor had the X Games bail, which was that was really scary.
He had a couple of bails.
Yeah. Haldor had a lot of bails. He really went for it this year, man. He's an insane person. Nicest family. We stayed with his family in Iceland, and they are just unbelievably nice. Amazing setup with a cabin in the back for guests to stay, and we hung out there for 2 weeks in his hometown. That was unbelievable too.
What is the story behind the name NeverNot? It's a bit ambiguous, but once you understand the meaning behind it, it makes a lot more. It's pretty obvious, I think.
Yeah, that's a kind of tricky one. It's
Well, I just did an interview with Nodis Kopis yesterday, actually, and he actually explained it really well. And
he named it.
Yeah, and he did all the art direction too, and so we have that web video coming out. I believe it's mid-November, him talking about it, and then him actually creating all the art for the movie, which was all handmade. It's a really cool sight to see. But he explained it really well, you know, and it's just the whole idea of just, never not giving up and never not trying. And that was kind of where in Per's documentary really shows of the guys who they're, people were telling them, Nicholas has a straight quote, they said he could never do this. He could never be a pro snowboarder. And he was just like, no, I'm going to snowboard. And so the whole theme behind the documentary is, it's never giving up and, never not trying, never not snowboarding. So it definitely shows up more in the part 2 in the documentary. And that was kind of, that stuff's kind of hard to show in an action movie with just snowboarding and just songs. So that was what was great about what Per did with that movie.
How much of a challenge was it to create something that's a bit more accessible to a broader, audience and pulls the curtain back, yet it doesn't alienate, the people who, watch 10 movies a year? Like how did it not seem like you were kind of pandering yet, and you achieved the opportunity or the ability to speak to multiple audiences at once without it being condescending or too watered down?
Well, I think that was the biggest challenge with the whole Part 2 movie because, you could make a documentary just for the core snowboarders. You could go super deep into things that the average person wouldn't never get. But we had, a bigger goal that we wanted to reach, both, because we wanted to make something that the core person would be stoked on and, someone's mom, but also the riders in the film, something that they can like show like their family or whatever, like this is what I do pretty much. So I think that was like the hardest task with the movie, because it's kind of constantly balancing on the level between pleasing the mainstream a little bit and then like showing the core people what they want to see.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways it parallels the duality that Nike aspires to, as far as giving resources to the core that wouldn't necessarily be there, while at the same time opening avenues for broader appeal. But at the same time, what's unique about how you made this happen is, like I said, I mean, a lot of times when you deal with a voiceover, you deal with an interview situation, it can come across as contrived and hokey, and it just doesn't seem to be the case there. And what's really interesting, I mean, is the fact that, with the exception of Nadas, whereas Nadas is obviously, I mean, he used to lay out Blunt magazine, and he's been involved in snowboarding for years, working for Quicksilver and stuff. But he's almost the extent of the people outside of endemic snowboarding that are involved in a project. A lot of times with a project of this scope, they'll get people kind of, reaching into the pot or kind of injecting their influence into it, yet they're not snowboarders. Didn't seem like there was a lot of that going on with this project yet. On paper, the opportunity for that to happen with a brand like Nike or even a project of this scope would happen. I mean, of course, I don't think the Rolling Stones snowboard, but what can you do?
Yeah, no, it was cool. I mean, just as far as everybody involved in the project, everybody's a snowboarder, and that was even everybody we work with is a snowboarder. And that's, I think, having Joel Muzzy do the interviews and write the script, write the story with Per was like, Muzzy is as cool and as core as it gets, and and we all have respect for him, and that was why bringing these people on was like, these are real people, and just because we're working for Nike doesn't mean it's different. They didn't bring in the guy from soccer, and they didn't bring in the guy from tennis. It was like, Per's been making snowboard movies since he was a kid, so have I. Muzzy's been doing it, Brian Craighill, Riley, everybody's been involved in snowboarding, and that was like the cool thing, and I think that's why you could see it come out that it's it's real.
And what's interesting, you talked about everybody being involved. I mean, there probably were iterations. I mean, I've heard stories about you guys, throwing ideas at the wall when you're in the big sandbox that is Nike, and just throwing ideas at the wall. I mean, names like Jordan get thrown around for certain roles and stuff. What were some of those instances?
Well, we talked to try and have Jordan be the narrator for the movie. And maybe now, like thinking about it, maybe it would have been a little weird. But I was just hyped. I was just like, this is Nike. Like, well, Jordan had some amazing commercials. Actually, that's how it came up. I looked at all of his old shoe commercials, and they were amazing, motivational. His voice is awesome. And
Spike Lee was at the hotel during the premiere that night in the lobby,
really?
so I mean, you would think that Mars Blackman would be in the mix.
Yeah, so there was crazy names thrown out for the narrator, and long story short, we didn't use it, and we ended up just using the riders telling the story, which I think turned out really well. It just seemed very real to me. When I watch it after the fact, 2 weeks after we're done, and it's nice to see it like that.
Your name even came up. Next to Jordan's.
Well, that's pretty good. Yeah. And Austin Smith. How is it to have Austin Smith back in the mix? He's been getting after it every year, but it seems like this year he had the physical wherewithal to match his hunger.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. I've been friends with Austin for a while, and always loved his snowboarding, always loved his video parts, and I was just talking about this last night. I was like, I think this is one of the coolest things about Nike. He was hurt for all these years, but they saw, what's in him. They saw his drive and his hunger, and that he still has it in him, and they supported him through his injuries. And I mean, this was just like the start. He's back now, so like next year it's gonna be. I think it's gonna be crazy next year. He just needed to get back full year healthy. And he's just like an amazing snowboarder. When we took him to Alaska, he was just like adapting. Nico and Kiki were just like, go down this, and he's just doing it, for his first time. And I stood on some stuff just filming, and I was like, maybe the hell he should come pick me up, and like he's just going down at first time, and so it's cool to see that, in person. It's crazy in person. Some stuff you can't really understand on camera, but man, when you're there, some stuff that these guys do is just ridiculous.
Well, that's the dilemma, is to translate that to the screen. But And Per, what was your favorite part of both movies?
I just like that it also that we have two products to make it way more diverse and be able to watch Carlino's movie and like getting really psyched for. That's the movie that I'm gonna put on like before I go snowboarding. I wouldn't really put on the part two because that's just, I don't know, it's just a different thing, you know. But that's the thing that I'm most stoked on, that we have like a complement. They complement each other really well. I think also like one thing that was really cool with doing this project, like usually when you work on like for a big company, like it's pretty much the biggest sports company in the world, like it was really cool because they really trusted like our vision and let us kind of do our thing and didn't like go in and like micromanage things and like say, oh, maybe you should do this, maybe you should that. So I think that was really cool that they trusted us to do the projects that we wanted to make. That was really cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Hey, great job.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you guys.
Okay, thanks. Top. Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks a lot.